Good evening, captive audience. It's Don Anderson here. We're Don Anderson here with the captive audience. I hope you all are doing well and welcome aboard. Please send me a quick chat note and let me know that you're there so I know I'm talking to someone. It's Wednesday, April 23rd. And as always, there's a lot to talk about. And of course, I'll do everything I can to cover as much as I can. So thank you all for joining. Unfortunately, Sunny was unable to come on board tonight because we'll be having some computer issues, and we thought rather than have you sit here and listen to us deal with computer issues, I just go ahead and launch solo tonight, and we'll have her join us the next time around. So, all of that said, let me just hop right in. I thought I'd start this time by speaking to some of the local news. And the local news here means Oregon specific, and more specifically, Portland specific. And so if you look at the chat line, I put a link there. If you look at a podcast, kind of talks about some of the things going on with regard to Portland, and more specifically with regard to Portland, the issues associated with the housing issues happening in Portland, and they've been having a lot of trouble with housing there. Rents are through the roof, housing prices are through the roof. So, what might be some of the things that you would do in order to look at a solution for that? Some of the some of the things that you would probably not do are the things that have not worked in the past, like rent control, like additional regulations. Those would be the sorts of things that one would think you wouldn't do, but not in Portland. And if you look at this link here, it gives you an excellent article where it talks about some of the things that Portland's doing to basically restrict growth and cause companies that do buildings to not want to produce those buildings in the Portland market. If you were a builder, a national builder, and you're looking to build apartments or you're looking to build houses, one of the first things you're going to scan the market and find those states, those municipalities where the regulations are friendly, where your costs aren't going to be so high, and those are the places where you think you can go and you can make a dollar. Well, it turns out that cities like Portland, Seattle, Los Angeles, New York City, Chicago, all the usual blue suspects are not going to be the places where you're going to have a friendly environment to do that. So as a result, they redirect their resources to places where they can make a dollar, and voila, you don't get any construction happening in Portland. No construction means tight housing market. Tight housing market means prices go up, and young people can't afford to get a house, and or people who can't afford to buy a house can't even afford the rent because rents are higher than the mortgage. And that's the situation that you see precisely happening in Portland. Let me see if I can't find you another article that I can send to you that kind of speaks to this same thing. And this one's entitled Portland apartment construction plunges as progressive policies choke development. Surprise, surprise, surprise. Um, so see, we'll get this one up here. Well, let's see. I thought I could get it up there. Um, let's see. Bear with me one moment. So we just added another article there for you to take a look at, and this one's pretty amazing. So it gives some actual data and statistics associated with just what's going on in that Portland apartment market. So housing productions dipped to a 13-year low in the Portland area. Construction in Portland peaked in 2018 and has done nothing but go downhill since then. There were 7,800 units in the process of being built in 2018. Just to give you a sense for how much this is, how much of a dive it's taken. 7,800 units in 2018 that are under construction. In 2024, 1,600. That's like almost 6 times less, a 600% drop in the number of units being built. And the reason for that, of course, is the liberal policies are basically preventing these construction projects from happening because the regulations are so high that the costs associated with building these units are so great that you cannot make a dollar doing it. Some of the other things they do is they set aside a certain portion of the building. If it's an apartment building, it must be set aside for, let's say, for example, Section 8 housing. Well, all those things do is they limit the amount of rent that can be charged, and as a result, that limits the profitability. People take a look at the numbers, can't make a dollar here, And so they go do they do their analysis, of course, all of these companies, and they go someplace where they can make the money. Some of the other things they do is they require a certain number of air conditioning units in an apartment building. Now, let's face it, you're in the Portland, Oregon area. I mean, there's what 2 months a year where you might need air conditioning, but they're requiring these builders to build air conditioning units. Um, it's just insane. I mean, why not let them build the thing? And if the tenant wants an air conditioning unit, they could buy an air conditioning unit and put it in the apartment. But these are the things that they do that keeps the number of affordable units available low, which drives the rent higher. And then liberals step in with, of course, the solution. They're the cause of the problem, but then they think the solution is something that they can do to fix it. And everything they design to do to fix it is something that just makes the problem worse. And then just to layer onto that, there's yet another article, and this one speaks to Portland economics again in terms of housing attractiveness. So back in 2017, they did this survey to take a look at which cities were the most attractive in terms of affordability from a rental perspective. When they did that survey, and this is mid-sized cities, right? So cities the size of Portland, if you will. And Portland ranked third out of 80 cities. That's really, really good. That's back in 2017. Fast forward to now, that ranking dropped all the way to 78th out of 80. So Portland is 78th out of 80. And what's happened in that time period? Well, in 2023, 4,820 jobs were lost in Multnomah County. Now, really, because the specific problem is really Multnomah County. It's almost not even the state of Oregon. These problems are specific to Multnomah County because that's where most of the population is, right? 9,600 high-paying jobs lost in 2024. Those are jobs that pay $100,000 or better. And remember, it's just now April, so they've lost almost 10,000 jobs, and the year is not even 30% done. So this is the direct result of the politics associated with Portland. High taxation and poor services combined to drive people out. And then there was yet another article that I found, and this was in, I think it was the Portland Tribune. It talked about people, and the title of the article was Sick and Tired of Portland. So it's very specific about Portland. And the people in the article were talking about the high crime, the high amounts of vandalism. And so a lot of these people were moving to either Tigard, so southwest Portland, or they were moving to Clark County across the bridge in the Vancouver area, areas north of that. And the specific reasons they gave were we had this tremendous amount of crime, they're paying these high taxes for services that we don't get. So part of that article had to do with a gentleman who had a business. I want to say it was an accounting business in Southeast Portland. Guy had been there like 35 or 40 years, and he just had enough. So I'm leaving Portland. Some of the things he described, it's like from a one of those dystopian novels from the 60s. So people are throwing bricks through his windows for absolutely no reason at all. Graffiti on his building, uh, trailers pulling up next to his building and using his utilities and using his electricity. You come down in the morning to go to work, it's in a downstairs stairwell. There's people sleeping in the stairwell in front of your door, well, going to the bathroom all over the place right in front of your door. These are the issues he's dealing with all the time. And then there's drugs and drug needles, gangsters around the corner. There was a shootout a few weeks ago in a lot across the street. This is like all the time. And you call the police and nothing ever happens because the police are too busy dealing with things. You can't blame the police in this case because the cities basically cause a number of police to decline to such a place where there's no police available to come deal with these kinds of property crimes because they have to deal with murders in progress. That's the nature of what we have going on in Portland. And as a result, the population is dropping. The types of citizens you want to move in are moving out. And uh, and so that's what you have going on in Portland. And their solutions are all the same tired liberal solutions that never worked as you saw in the past, which basically make the problem worse. I mean, to think that someone would be in this day and age, we're talking about rent control after we've seen decades and decades of that not working. Additionally, talking about even government sponsored housing, which was another one. They're looking to build more government housing. So apparently they didn't learn a lesson from Bedford Stuyvesant in New York, Cabrini Green in Chicago, Nickerson Gardens in Los Angeles. None of these places work. It's Soviet style housing that basically just attracts the worst of the worst, and the bottom falls out. And it's the worst place that a family can possibly be. But that's the imagination of a liberal. It never changes. The year changes, the name changes, the strategy stays exactly the same. So But it's a great segue to talk about another liberal state to our south, which of course is California. And I couldn't help because suddenly that whole thing's fallen out of the news. I don't know if any of you all have noticed just how far it's fallen out of the news. And that's the whole thing post fire. So you got to ask yourself, so what's happened after the fire? I mean, we haven't heard a thing about what the construction is going to be because remember, the mayor of the city promised they were going to have all this building done, right? So here we are, and it must be 3 months since that fire happened. And what do we have? How many building permits do you think have been issued? It's 75 days now since that fire. So what do we have in terms of building permits? Well, what we have is this. We have a grand total of 4 building permits. Now, you would have thought there'd be hundreds of permits by now, at least 30 or 40 permits. Thousands of homes burned to the ground. And 75 days later, we have counted 4 building permits. Now, anyone who's familiar with socialism, anyone's familiar with dealing with the government, anyone who's ever been to the DMV or who've ridden Amtrak is not surprised by this one bit. We got people who have no place to live, and the best their government can do for them is issue a grand total of 4 building permits. And remember, we're talking about the Pacific Palisades here. We're talking about one of the wealthiest zip codes in the United States. And even they can't get these people off the dime to do what they want them to do. That's the nature of dealing with government officials. And until they clear that backlog of government regulations and permits and bureaucrats sitting in there, that's never going to change. 6,800 structures were burned to the ground. And 75 days into this, we're talking 4 permits. Does it get any more outrageous than this? You have to ask yourself, if you're a Californian and you vote Democrat, you have to be absolutely out of your mind, particularly if you live in the Palisades. They've learned a big, gigantic lesson because this is the exact stuff that they voted for. They voted for these type of politicians. They voted for these type of regulations. They voted to save the one-eyed snail darter and all that other stuff. And as a result, the city's now in ashes. More to the point, their houses to the ashes is burnt to the ashes. And now people who roam the streets because they don't have any crime enforcement. So thugs are basically going through and stealing their stuff. And hey, you have to learn the hard way. And this is what's happening in California. Basically, it's a classic example of what I call things moving at the speed of government. And it makes me step back and realize, you think about how Doge has operated. They've gone in, and this is precisely what Musk did with his corporation when they took over, I think it was Twitter. They went in and immediately slashed like 75% of the employees, identified the employees. They weren't doing anything productive. And then it just got rid of them. And the amazing thing about that was it didn't have any adverse impact on the company's performance at all. And that's stunning when you think about it. Can you imagine running a business, firing 75% of the employees, and it not having an adverse impact on your business? You have to think to yourself, how much money was I wasting in the first place to be able to do that? And that's precisely what I think, they're going to find in California. Until they get rid of these government employees and get rid of these regulations, the whole state's just not going to perform. Um, Amazing. 9,600 structures. You got 4 permits in 75 days in what's supposed to be an emergency situation. It's just incredible. And I think one of the smartest things that Trump has done is essentially he has said to the governor of that state, we're happy to help you. The other 49 states are happy to give you money that I think it's what 39 or 40 billion they're asking for to bail them out. But in order to get that 39 or 40 billion, you're going to have to do a few things. And one of them is to get rid of these silly regulations. The other is to actually require voter ID to vote. And then finally, you're going to have to get rid of these regulations and rules around water, so you actually have water in your reservoirs, clearing away the shrubs around the homes, all the things that common sense would dictate that you would do. So your insurance companies would come back, insurance rates would fall, and people could actually get in and start rebuilding their homes. Absolutely stunning. And one other observation I have to make about this, if you can't get a permit to rebuild your own home, who really is the homeowner? Is it you or the government? I would maintain that it's actually the government. You don't own the home. You're paying these outrageous taxes. Your house burns to the ground due to the behavior of the government. And then you don't even have a right to rebuild on your own property. I would submit to you that you already have a communist system working there. They just don't call it communism. But that's precisely what's happened in California. So this is a good time to move right along. Got a few other things to just kind of run by you all, and if I could get this to pull up, bear with me here. And I'm hopefully you all are able to get these links. But here's one that is based on a Substack article that I wrote entitled "The Current Existential Threat to the United States," and that threat would be, here we go, and that threat would be the CCP or China. We got to the work though. So if you have an opportunity to read that when you get an opportunity, I think you will find it quite interesting. Of course, I'm tooting my own horn there. And if you subscribe to that, I'm writing a series of things that have to do with the CCP, meaning the Chinese Communist Party. Because I think one of the things that we're missing here is we're already at war with China. A lot of people think when they think of war, they think kinetic war. Kinetic war simply means that you're actually firing weapons. But asymmetrical war is everything except for kinetic war. So non-kinetic warfare. So warfare be things like having selling fentanyl to your neighbors so it can get across the border, working with drug lords in order to get drugs into the United States, in order to destroy the youth in the United States. That would be an example of an asymmetrical warfare act. High tariffs, so that you can drive down the amount of manufacturing that goes on in the United States and drive that manufacturing to your own country. That'd be a form of asymmetrical warfare. Buying up farmland in the country of your enemy, they don't have access to their own food in the event that there is a kinetic war. That would be what you might call asymmetrical warfare. Hopefully, this is becoming clear to you. And I think a lot of people don't realize, most people don't realize, we're already at war with China. You know, it's not a cool thing to say. It's not a nice thing to say. When a country is doing those kinds of things to you, let me just walk you through some of the things that China has done. And I walked through some of that in this Substack article that you'll take a look at. And I think makes that pretty obvious. So just a few of these things. First, everyone knows about the level of industrial espionage that China is the most dishonest country. Maybe the Soviet Union was on this level, but the Chinese are taking it to another level in terms of theft. It's been estimated the United States has lost somewhere in the neighborhood of $20 to $30 billion a year from Chinese cyber espionage. And that doesn't even include traditional espionage that comes from human beings doing just regular old spycraft theft. It's been estimated that the United States has lost somewhere in the neighborhood of $600 billion over the last 20 years just from that type of theft. And we're not even talking about the 300 billion or so that we're in deficit, trade deficit that we're running with China right now. The fact that we've lost 60 to 90,000 jobs, depending on who you talk to over the last 20 years, to China, about 3.5 million jobs, 60 to 90,000 factories, take that back, have been lost to China. Then there's their Belt and Road Initiative, which is the strategy that they put into place in order to infiltrate other countries by giving them loans and doing construction projects for them, getting them in debt to China so that they then dictate to them what they want to do. And they just got caught with their hand in a cookie jar, basically, with regard to Panama, because that's what they were precisely doing there. And Trump basically called them to the carpet on that one and not allowed them to take over the Panama Canal. But these are the kinds of things that they've been doing. And and the list just goes on and on. We talked about the fentanyl. How about many people have already forgotten about those labs they found in Southern California, where they were doing experiments on biological warfare using rats. That lab got discovered and got uncovered, and then the news precisely buried it. But how about that? So, and we all know about COVID, and there's a lot of suspicion around them releasing COVID intentionally, and then not doing anything to let anybody know about it. Is that a certainty? I don't know, but it sure looks awfully suspicious that they created COVID and did nothing to cover it up. One of the things we know they did was they reduced the amount of PPP available to the rest of the world because they garnered the market. They're talking about things like masks, those kinds of things. All the manufacturing of that took place in China. They hoarded it, wouldn't sell it to the rest of the world in order to help cause the spread of the disease. Now, I don't believe those things do help to cause the spread of the disease. But that's like beside the point. The point was they kept that to keep the rest of the world from being able to, specifically the United States, from being able to protect its own citizens. So, to my mind, these things are all very strategic. And the long-term objective of the CCP is to gut the United States and weaken the country so that it gets to a point where it's unable to defend itself when it's time for kinetic war. So I think you'll find that article very interesting. there's historical basis for it. I mean, recent history, where other countries have done these sorts of things. It's just that the Chinese have taken it to the next level. And I really don't think their objective is to invade the United States per se. That would be insane. Um, you know, and the likelihood of that will be of a successful invasion will be minimal, but will be highly successful as they can weaken the United States to the point where they can basically be the kings of Southeast Asia, which is really their goal. And if you go back to Japan back in the 40s, prior to the attack on Pearl Harbor, the Japanese goal was they called it the Japanese Greater Co-Prosperity sphere, which meant that the Japanese would be in control. Their objective was be in control of the Orient, basically Southeast Asia. And the only thing preventing them from doing that was the United States was refusing to allow them to get access to oil. And they didn't have the ability to do that because Japan is very poor in terms of minerals, if you will. So they had no access to be able to get their own oil. So they attacked the United States in order to get access to that oil so that they could become the dominant force in the world in that part of the world. And China, I believe that's their initial objective is become the dominant force there. And the only way to do that is to weaken the United States. So very interesting stuff. I don't think you get that in the regular media. You have to dig a little deeper to find those kinds of things out. But I think you'll find that it passes the logic test, which I always tell my kids, does that make sense? And you have to ask yourself, does that make sense? I think it holds together very well. Um, and yeah, pretty interesting. Yeah, just looking at some of the commentary that you had here. Yeah, there's been a lot of Chinese coming across the border as well. Just responding to your comment, Marjorie, and I don't believe that's an accident either. And it's not, and it's funny about that. It's not a bunch of men. It's not a bunch of women and children coming across the border. It's like military age men coming across the border, which ought to be something that worries you. A certain percentage of them are coming for a better life. Heck, if I were them, I'd come too. I couldn't blame them. But a certain percentage of those are what you might call sleeper agents. I don't think that's anything out of a spy novel. These are the kinds of things that evil empires do. And by leaving our southern border so wide open, and more recently, in fact, our northern border as well, the last administration really set us up for a disastrous result, if you will. So there is that. Then just great time to segue and talk a little bit about the tariffs. And this news happened so fast that I could hardly keep up with it. But the last time I looked, we had tariffs on China of 145%. And what I like about that is Trump doing that indicates that finally the United States realizes that we are in a war. Just like with the Japanese back in the 30s, the Japanese knew they were at war against us, but we didn't know they were at war against us, and we didn't realize as they bombed Pearl Harbor. So finally, the United States is waking up and realizing that we're not in a kinetic war yet. Hopefully, we can keep it from being a kinetic war, but it's absolutely brilliant that we've raised these tariffs because these tariffs are going to do a couple of things. Number one, it's going to send a signal to the rest of the world that we're not going to be the doormat anymore. We are the most powerful country in the world, the most powerful economy in the world, the place where everybody sells their stuff. So if we ain't buying, you ain't selling. I mean, that's pretty much the message. And the rest of the world finally realizes that we're not going to be the doormat anymore. Hey, Europe, pay for your own defense. We're not going to pay for your defense anymore. You're going to be on your own pretty quickly if you don't step up and meet your fair share of the defense. And by the way, you're not going to steal any more of our jobs either, which is exactly what the Chinese have been doing. It's just terrible. And I'm sure if you drive across the country, you realize this yourself. You go to these small town America, and these places have been literally gutted. I mean, there's no young people because they have to leave because they can't support themselves in any jobs that are left. The ability to work with their hands, pretty much gone. Um, and the other thing is that's a national defense thing. This just isn't a social service thing, which is enough of a reason, but it's a national defense thing. If we get to mine our own titanium, we can't mine our own coal. We can't get our own oil. We can't build things. If it ever did come down to a kinetic war, you think your enemy is going to sell it to you? And even your allies. Hey, allies are good only to the degree that it's in their self interest. If it's not in their self interest to help us, guess what? They ain't going to help us. So you want to be independent. And it doesn't make sense to allow ourselves to be completely dependent on other countries. The free traders of the world, nice to be part of that too. Believe in free trade, but fair trade is more important than free trade. And in the perfect world, free trade would make sense. it would make sense that the country that does the best job of making cars, maybe they should just specialize in making cars. The country that does the best job of, or the most efficient job of delivering dairy, maybe that should be the country that delivers dairy. If the world were full of honest people of great integrity with great leadership that were acting in the best interest of anyone, then that'd be a great world to live in. Unfortunately, it's not. And if the Chinese are the best at making, and they're not, let's say that they were the best at some sort of technology that could be used for the military, it doesn't make sense to allow them to be the only ones making it because eventually it'd be turned against you. And finally, the Trump administration, it's the first administration probably since Reagan, recognized this. You cannot do that. And so it's just great to see us pulling back, getting that manufacturing stuff back to here so that we can do that. And it does a couple of things. Number one, it helps us to create a thriving and growing middle class, a muscular middle class, where we actually build our own stuff with our own hands. And if that means that we pay a little bit more for junk toys that we get from China, then good. And then finally, those countries they can still make their stuff. They just have to make it here. I think that's a heck of a deal. If you don't want the tariffs, Toyota, that Japan, let Toyota and Honda open their factories here, and you employ American citizens. We wind up with a muscular class. We wind up with the technology. Well, how to do it? TMSC out of Taiwan, the largest semiconductor company in the world. Hey, if you want to avoid the tariffs, just open the factories here. We'd love to have you. And Taiwan has agreed to do more and more of that sort of thing. These things are great for the United States because it keeps the United States strong, keeps us independent and not reliant on these other countries. And people have to recognize that, hey, countries are just like people in a lot of ways. I know when I was looking at history courses when I was a kid, and you're always taught how great it is that Lafayette and the French, were so willing to help out the United States in order to defeat Britain during the Revolutionary War. Well, that's only sort of part of the story. The real reason the French were interested in helping the United States out was because they wanted to poke an eye in the British because they were at war with the British. And anything they can do to weaken the British, they were happy to do it. What is that old saying about an enemy, a friend of my friend is my enemy, the enemy of my friend is my friend. That's precisely the logic that goes on around the world. And so we just need to recognize that and then act accordingly. I love the fact that we have an administration that's stepping up and doing the logical thing, right? It's just the logical thing. Um, then on the local health front, let me see if I can't bring up yet another article, if I can get my computer to behave. And that is with regard to the things that RFK has been doing with regard to, let's see, come on, this thing will cut and paste for me. Um, there we go. So U.S. launches a massive effort to pinpoint the cause of spiking autism. This is an absolutely fascinating subject to me. And those of you who are 50 years old plus, I'm going to guess you're probably going to realize, or you've seen the same things that I've been seeing. My wife and I have been talking about this for the last 10 or 15 years. Do you remember when you were in grade school seeing large numbers of kids with autism or being on the spectrum? We never even heard of that sort of thing. You never saw it. I think there were a couple of kids who it's impolite to say it now, but they were mentally retarded. And there were a couple of kids like that in a couple of classes I had in school. Down syndrome, that's probably what. So there are a couple of kids with Down syndrome, but outside of that, there was none of this spectrum stuff. And all of a sudden, in the last 20 years, it's everywhere. And we used to always add this is just our imaginations. What's going on with this? And this study, I think this article I just sent to you kind of speaks to this. Blah, 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 blah. Let's see. Autism rates spike in recent years. Here you go. 1 out of 36 kids in the United States has autism spectrum disorder. 1 out of 36, that is like huge. That's like roughly 3% of the population. Um, and that's up from 1 in 150 in 2002. Now, 1 in 150 is really high too. But in that time period, it's basically gone up, what, 4 or 5 times just in the last 20 years? That's like insane. There's something in the environment, and there's something that we're doing in the environment, is more to the point, that's causing this to happen. Now, I don't know what that thing is, I've seen all kinds of speculation in terms of what that could be. Um, could it be a change? And I'm not talking about the COVID vaccine. Let's set that aside. We all know that's insane. It wasn't studied at all. But I'm talking about the vaccines we grew up with. Um, I don't know that those are the same vaccines that they were giving kids in the 50s and 60s that they're giving kids now. Could that be part of the reason? Um, could it be all these drugs? Kids are on all kinds of drugs. I saw another study that said something like uh, I think it was something like 20% of kids under the age of like 12 are on a drug. Are you kidding me? I don't think I knew of anyone other than maybe something like asthma or something. But kids on chronic disease drugs before they're 12 years old? I mean, that's crazy. Things like antidepressants. These were like only studied in adults. That's the first thing because it's not ethical to study drugs in people under 21. So, having said that, there's tons of kids being described Zoloft, Prozac, I mean, serotonin drugs before they're even like 18. How in the world is that possible? And of course, none of these drugs are studied in combination use. They're studied in isolation because that's the only way that you can really do it. So, person might be taking an autism drug. They might be taking a drug like Ritalin, right? They might take, which is another one that's being used out of control. Might be taking an asthma drug. They might be taking an antihistamine. Um, and no one knows what these things are doing in combination. So that's another thing that's changed in the environment, if you will, over the last 20 or 30 years. Then we haven't talked about things. What's the impact of social media? We know that's had a crazy effect. And then last but not least, and I think this is one of the things that RFK is really looking at, what about all the changes in the food itself? Something is really funky with in the food. When I was a kid, there was in our neighborhood, there was a lot of kids in my neighborhood because everybody had kids back then. That's the other thing. There were Everybody had four kids. There was one family that had two kids, and everybody else had at four was kind of like the norm. A couple of families were six or seven, and there was only one kid that was obese. Everybody else was skinny. Now you look around, these kids are like fat. Now, some of that might be due to inactivity, but I'm going to suspect that it's more than just inactivity. There's lots of people who are inactive who don't get fat or used to be, but they were skinny and they were just not in shape. They didn't have muscles, but they weren't fat. Now these kids are gigantosaurus. I mean, like 100, 150, 200 pounds overweight is not uncommon. Something else is going on here. When you take a look at the food additives and high fructose and all of these things they're just injecting into food, you have to wonder if that plays a role in it. And then you go and you look at things like the welfare programs, like I think it's WIC, Women, Infants, and Children. They allow you to buy junk food with those programs. It's literally encouraging it. So the percentage that portion of the population that's likely to be on WIC is also a percentage of the population that's least likely to be educated on the kinds of food that they're eating. They're also the most likely to not make their own meals, most likely to eat things that are pre-prepared. So you add all that up, and these people are going to the store and they're getting cupcakes and Twinkies and burgers and fries and pre-made, junk food that you get basically at a service station, right? These kinds of things are disastrous for your health. Um, and we're subsidizing it. So we're subsidizing this disastrous health in a portion of the population that's least able to make an educated decision on top of that. And then you take a look at the long-term ramifications of doing that because they're the ones who are most likely to wind up in the medical system on the rest of the taxpayers' dime because now they're overweight, they have hypertension, they have all these other diseases that result from that. And we're winding up paying for them on the back end of their shortened lives. So it's just a horrible problem. And it's great to see that someone's finally addressing it, that this administration is taking a hard look at it because they weren't even allowed to talk about it, they weren't even allowed to study this stuff. But the studies have got to be done. We've got to look at the data, and we got to know if the vaccines are causing these autism rates and this ill health stuff. The excessive use of drugs, that's got to be studied and looked at and reduced. I mean, drugs should be the last resort, particularly in people who are under working age or people even under 65. Really, drugs should always be the last resort. You have to have them. They're great in your emergency kit. But the first thing you need to go to is, what am I eating? How am I exercising? How am I taking care of myself? What is the stress in my life? impact those things so that your body can heal itself. So you're not required to manufacture things to do it. A, you're going to be healthier. B, you're going to live longer. And C, it's going to cost society a whole lot less. So anyway, whew, that was a heck of a rant. Um, so there's that. There's McDonald's fries, Pat. They use, and this is the whole thing about McDonald's. At least the French fries tasted good 50 years ago. Now they taste like crap, and on top of that, they make you fat sick. What can you say? Well, the other thing that RK looked at was, I think, food dyes was another one of the things he talks about. I'm just kind of looking at this article here. Let's see. Here we go. So they're doing two independent, let's see, authorization, two synthetic food coloring additives are going to be revoked in the next couple of months. So citrus red number 2 and orange beet. I don't even know what these things are, but they're out there. So RK has persuaded the drug companies to remove those of their own accords. No laws, just asking them to take those out, and they're responding to it, and that's a good thing. By the end of the year, they're looking at working with the food industry to end the use of 6 other dyes. Uh, green number 3. Well, I don't even read all these to you. They don't mean anything to you. There's like 6 different dyes. So then you got to ask yourself, if it's that easy to remove them, why'd you have them in there in the first place? I'd love to know what the rationale is for that. Here we go. 41% of children have at least one health condition. So this is from one of the studies that RFK is looking at. 41% of children have at least one health condition. I just don't remember that as a kid. I mean, everybody was healthy. Um, that's just a crazy statistic. 41% of kids are sick. Um, this is RFK quote. When my uncle was president, 3% of American kids had chronic disease. Today, it's around 60%. Can you get your head around that? 60% have a chronic disease. And probably some of the usual suspects would be uh, things like depression, obesities, diabetes. I bet those be the ones. Hypertension. Whoever heard of somebody under 50 with hypertension? That's where we are now. Something is clearly wrong. Here's some of the other things: ADHD, neurological disorders, speech delay, language delay, Tourette syndrome, narcolepsy, uh, ASD, autism. These are things, some of these you never even heard of 30 years ago. But something's clearly wrong. And they're saying, blah, blah, blah. So it was like, here's again a quote from RFK. When he said when his uncle was president, there was no money being spent treating these kinds of diseases. He said today is 1.8 trillion a year. 1.8 trillion treating those diseases. Um, something is clearly stinking in Denmark sports fans, and all these other things get a lot of the headlines, obviously with the tariffs, and that's great news on those economic fronts. But if we don't fix this health thing um, amongst our young people, it really ain't going to matter, right? So I'm really glad to see that that's being attacked. And then one of the last things about worthy of discussion was, I'm not sure if any of y'all caught the news about the world on the World Economic Front. One of these guys that kind of hides in the shadows because the major media doesn't talk about it is the head of that, and this guy Klaus Schwab. So this is just classic. So the World Economic Forum, this is this group of people, largely based out of Brussels and largely European in nature. But basically, they get the so-called leading elite of the world to come together, and these are the people who are going to tell the rest of us how to live. These are the people who are all about the one world government, the new world order. If you remember that Time magazine article, a headline that came out about changing the world, new world order crowd, this is that crowd. And this guy, Klaus Schwab, is the head of that. So there's recently been an investigation that's occurred where Klaus Schwab has kind of been caught with his hand in the cookie jar. So let me just read you some of these things. So uh, here we go. He's been accused by inside whistleblower of funneling resources into lavish personal indulgences, charging private in-room hotel massages to the nonprofit, directing junior employees to withdraw thousands of dollars on his behalf to justify setting up forum-funded token meetings to justify luxury travel. Um, they control a $50 million lakefront mansion, purchased and renovated by the forum basically for their own private use. Is the usual stuff that happens when these communists get to the top of an outfit. So one of the things you first have to realize with these liberals, especially the top of these outfits, they say the objective is to help the world. They say the objective is they're there to help the poor, and that's how they sell themselves. But at the end of the day, that's just the vehicle to get us to give them our money so that they can live large and rule the world. That's precisely what it is. Every time you dig, you wind up finding this kind of stuff underneath. So this is classic. He's going to be going down. He's saying he's going to retire. Basically, that just means there's one more player off the chessboard, but the other players are still in play, in you will, in the game. But we all ought to be aware of this. This is a great opportunity now that they've outed what really goes on behind the curtain. We know that outfit's not about helping people. They're not about the environment. They're not about feeding and starving people. They're not about improving the lives of anyone else. What they're about is improving their own lives, their own control, their own power. Um, and so, sports fan, that pretty much covers the key things I wanted to cover tonight. Hopefully, you all had a good time listening to all of that. I hope you get an opportunity to read some of those things that I shared with you from an article perspective. And next week we'll have this technology thing fixed so that the great Sunny can join us and we can have a wonderful Wednesday together. But I always enjoy talking to you. Hope you all had a good time with us. Um, yeah, globalist, not yet. Thank you, Marjorie. Yep, globalism is bad and we're winning, but we haven't won. And I think that's the thing we have to remember. This is going to be the battle for the rest of our lives and beyond. Um, but the good news is we've woken up and we joined the fight. So thank you all for a fun evening. I hope you all have a great time. Thank you, Lori. You guys take care. We'll catch you next time. Uh, Godspeed.